Allie with PotomacBeads.com and PotomacBeads.eu, and in this video tutorial today I'm going to be showing you a couple of different techniques, including how to do peyote stitch, how to string and use basic stringing materials, how to wrap and create a band to go around a double drilled bead, and actually how to finish the complete necklace and graduate it so that it sits correctly on your neck. For this project, which I'm calling the banded necklace, you are going to be using some Delica beads, and the various colors and the materials will be listed in the description below the video, so you can check that out there. So in addition to your Delica beads, you're going to need some 12 by 15 millimeter oval double drilled gemstones. These are limited quantity, so check those out online. In addition to the gemstones and the actual Delica beads, some stringing wire, some stringing thread, some crimp beads, a wonderful clasp, and some beads to go in between. Again, those will all be listed down below, and we'll get ready to start our project. So to begin, we are going to learn this peyote stitch that goes as a band, almost a belt around the bead. Again, this is a 12 millimeter bead, and that's going to determine the size of the double drilled gemstone that you're using. Will determine the amount of rows that you need to do for your actual band. I will be doing 40 rows of my peyote stitch, and we're only doing peyote stitch that is 4 beads wide. So it's nice and easy to do this quickly and really kind of make a statement on your project. Whether or not you want to do a design, here I did a diagonal. Whether or not you want to do it banded and keep a middle color different than the outer edges, or just keep it simple and one color, that's up to you. To begin, I have a thread and needle that is about 24 inches, and I have a size 10 beading needle on it. To begin our peyote stitch, we are going to start with a stop bead. A stop bead is a bead that's not included in the project, and that will eventually come off the project once we actually learn the technique of connecting the two peyote ends together. To put the stop bead on, place it on your needle and let it fall down till there is about 1.5 inches to 2 inches left of thread. Take the needle and thread back through that stop bead away from the tail 2 times, which will expose 2 pieces of thread on the outside of that bead. Again, this bead is coming off the project. I have an 8OC bead here, just that I know is going to be off. If you're not familiar with peyote, I would suggest that you check out some of our other YouTube videos, and that will help you learn peyote before learning this banding technique, but it is very simple. To start here, whether or not what design you're going to do, and I kind of have all kinds of colors laid out here, I'm going to start my design with a bright silver in the middle, 2 of my matted silvers, and another bright silver. Let those 4 beads fall down to that stop bead. To begin the peyote stitch, I'm going to take another one of my silver lined. I'm going to do 2 outer edges here with the silver lined crystal, and then I'll do the matte silver lined crystal in the middle. I'm going to go back through the 3rd bead in line, coming towards the stop bead. Bring the needle down. And if it happens to go up away from the stop bead, just pull it down. What you want to achieve is those 2 beads at the end sitting right next to one another. That's going to make it so that way you have that line of the silver. That frosted or matted, then I'm going to pick up 1 bead, sew through bead number 1 towards the actual bead. Give a nice tight pull, and that gets our 3rd row of peyote in. So the way that you're going to count the peyote rows is almost on a diagonal. You have 1 bead, 2 bead, 3 beads. You've got 3 rows going on, or 1, 2, 3 in length. From here, I'm going to start continuing with the peyote. Every time you do the peyote stitch, you are going to pick up 1 bead and sew through 1 bead. Each row is going to consist of 2 beads, one that is going to be the silver lined and one that is going to be the matte silver lined. I'm picking up a silver line because I'm on the outer edge, and now I'm going to be progressing away from the stop bead, sewing through the bead that's sticking up that I just put on in the previous row. Put on another bead. This is that middle color of the frosted, and then through the outer edge. So that gets your start to your peyote stitch. On the outer edge again, I just pick up the plain silver lined, and there's just ever so slight of a difference in it than the matte. And come back through. Switching up here then first, I'm going to do the silver lined. And you notice that the needle and thread is constantly going up and then switching to go down. Again, I'm going to pick up one of each color, adding 2 beads per line or per row. On goes the silver lined, and you're coming back the opposite way and sewing through. So this is kind of assuming that you already know that peyote stitch. Again, if you don't, I have lots of other YouTube videos teaching the basics of peyote, but I'm just continuing to add the beads in that line. Again, what we want to do is count how many rows we have. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 rows done so far. We need to work the whole way up to 40 rows, adding 2 beads at a time, alternating with those colors so that you have the matte in the middle and then the shiny on the outer edges. Once you have your 40 rows on, we're going to learn to connect the 2 peyote sides together, making a seamless peyote band. It's actually a lot shorter than you would assume. Again, it's going to be determined by the size of the stone, how much needs to go around the circumference of the stone. So it will be affected too by the height of the stone a little bit. When you know that it's time to add and you know that you have enough, your thread should be coming out the opposite side of the start thread. That way you know that your beads are going to line up seamlessly. The next bead I would be putting on is a silver lined crystal, which I'm going to, instead of adding one, connect to the bead that's already on at the starter side. Again, then I know bead 2 that I was going to add was going to be that matted one, and it's already at the top. Your thread, if they are not ending on opposite sides, the starter thread and the thread that you're connecting to, you're going to have beads that line up at the same place, and it's not going to create a seamless connection. So, taking the thread and needle, we're going to bend the 2 sides together. Almost, again, they're going to fit together like a perfect little puzzle piece there. Taking the thread and needle, instead of adding another bead, we're going to sew back towards the stop bead through that first bead that's on the other side. Coming back to the side that we started with then, we're going to sew through the second bead in line, just as if we were doing the peyote stitch after adding that first bead. Then I'm going to go back over to the starter side, sewing towards the stop bead through the second bead that I would add. The thread is going to zigzag back and forth between the 2 sides. And then the last stitch that I'm going to do is through the ending side, through the last bead, coming out. Your thread and needle should end directly next to the stop bead. I'm going to pull that stop bead down a little bit, and you should have thread coming out of the ending row of the peyote and thread coming out the starting row of the peyote, with them right next to one another. To actually finish this design up, I'm going to sew down through that same bead that the starter thread is coming out of, right towards the middle of the project. Lastly, sew up through the bead that's next to it on the outer edge, so the next silver lined crystal, or you can go back up through the last bead, it's up to you. And we're just going to reverse the thread, which is going to tuck in between the 2 peyote. So the thread went through that silver lined bead there. I'm coming through the silver lined bead right next to it. Pulling nice and tight then, I'm going to take off the thread and needle, as well as the stop bead, and simply tie those 2 ends together. I chose the silver thread because of the silver lined crystal. And you can see as you work with silver lined, if you're not working with the Duracoat silver lined, you may get a little bit of those crystal flecks that silver coming off. Taking the threads out now to learn how to end it, we're going to hold those threads off to the side, leaving about 1/8 of an inch. I heat up and I press the thread button first, heating up those outer coils before I take them through the thread. From there then, I'm going to burn down those thread edges right against the project. If you want to and you want it very seamless and you don't want to see the thread ends at all, what you can do is sew the needle and thread back through one direction, put a needle on the opposite end of thread and sew back through the other direction, and then burn down somewhere in the middle. Now you have your perfect little band that's going to stretch right over top of the gemstone, fitting perfectly. So that gemstone band then, once we put our wire through, is going to hold it right in place. Again, you can do a number of different designs on the same necklace, whether or not you want to go diagonal, whether or not you want to keep it plain, or whether or not you want to do 2, 3, or just one single color. I'm going to sew a couple more of these bands that are 40 beads long, or 40 rows long by 4 beads wide, and add them to my gemstone beads, and then I will begin to show you how to actually string the design into the necklace. As I'm designing my piece and have the different stitch marks basically on the beads here, I have the 2 in the middle with the outer edges being brighter. I have the diagonal going on in the middle, and then I'm going to do the 2 black bands. I figured I would show with the black band because it's a little bit easier to see how to do that seaming up again. Again, when you have those 20 beads on the outer edge or your 40 rows, you want to make sure that your thread and needle are coming out the opposite corner of the starter thread. With your thread and needle in hand, you're going to go back through towards the starter bead, that first bead on the corner. Coming back down then, we're going to zigzag going through the second bead that's sticking up on the end side. You can see that loop there then. We're going to go back to the starter side. Again, always progressing towards that stop bead. You can see that zigzag in action there again. Back to the end side. And then we'll do a nice pull to get rid of all that extra thread. Moving that starter bead or that stop bead out of the way, I'm going to sew down through that first bead that the thread is coming out of. Sew back up through that last bead in the project, that finishing bead that I just was coming out of. Give a nice tight pull, and then tie those 2 thread ends together. Again, this is with delica beads. You could do 11-0 seed beads in the same fashion. I'm going to pull, and then one last time to show the burning, I'm going to press the button, heat up those coils, burn through my threads, and then burn those thread edges down. Tuck that to the back a little bit, and burn down additionally if you have any extra still showing. There I have my loop, and now I have my design completed, that I'm gonna have my black on either side, my crystal ones there kind of on the edges, brightening it up, and I'll get my gemstone stringing in the middle, and we'll do the actual gradedness of the design. So I'm going to begin actually stringing my necklace on my cable wire, and you can use a bead stopper if you want. You can hold the end, that's up to you. And I'm going to begin with the top of the necklace. Again, this is 2 holes, and I'm going to add my individual gemstones that don't have any wrappings on them with it. You can play with the pattern, play with the design, and get exactly what you want. I want to bring a little bit more black into the design as I work in the crystals and those 4mm rounds. So that black labradorite kind of highlights that white laced agate really nicely. I'm going to use a crystal, and then before and after my gemstone, I'm always going to use a black delica. String on my first gemstone, and I'm going to go through the top hole of the bead there, and you're going to go right out the other end. If you need to move your casing down, you can do that a little bit. Coming out then, my pattern is going to be my 2 delica beads that are going to kind of sit, or I'm sorry, my 1 delica bead that's going to sit nicely right against the bead. And then along the top, I'm just going to keep it nice and bright, adding in a crystal between each. Again, the delica bead gets added, and I pick up the next gemstone. Because they are flat on one side, I'm making sure that all of them face the same direction. Again, repeating the pattern, it's just going to string right along the top with the Delica in the black, my crystal to bring in some shine, and my Delica right along the top. So you can see I'm keeping it nice and bright at the top. Then on to the next bead, stringing right along the top. As I come out the other side, you can move the band down a little bit if you need to. And I'm going to continue stringing right along the top, adding in my banded and unbanded beads with my crystal and my 11 O's on either side. Now that I have the top strung with the Delicas and the 3x4mm crystal, I'm going to string the bottom. The key is when you want it to sit in a curve that you're going to have a bead on the bottom that is larger than the bead on the top. A lot of the carrier bead patterns have a 4mm on top and then a 6mm bead on the bottom. I'm going to be using a 4mm bead along the bottom, and I have that 3mm crystal rondelle along the top. Like the top, I'm going to start with a Delica bead, and you're going to take your beading wire through the second hole of that gemstone. So you're going to go through the bottom hole of the gemstone, which is going to sit exactly separating that nice band around the piece. Pick up another Delica bead, your 4mm gemstone, and then a Delica bead after the black labradorite. From there then, I'm going to string through the next bottom bead. You can see already that size difference between the top and the bottom is creating a little bit of a curve in the pattern. And we're going to continue on then with that same design. Delica, 4, Delica, and then in along the bottom of the next gemstone. Because this does have a front and a back to the design as well, I am taking those ends of the piece of the banding and making sure that if I do see any ends that they are positioned towards the back of the piece. So as I continue now, I'm going to make sure to kind of squeeze those beads in between the band and continue adding all along the piece, adding into the second row with that darker row along the bottom. Now that I have the cabling through all of those 2-hole gemstone beads, all I'm going to do is bring up the ends together and create my actual necklace portion of the piece. To do so, I'm just going to be mimicking the bottom, and your pattern can be whatever you want. You can keep it looking as 2 strands and use a 2-strand clasp. You can do it as 1. That is up to you. You can also attach to chain. That's just a visual, what you prefer. So I have those 2 beads there ready that they're coming on an angle, and I'm going to bring them together then through another gemstone bead. So you'll have 2 strands going through the gemstone. This then brings those 2 back into a single point and a single purpose. And then I'm just going to go with my pattern then, ending the design, getting some of that brightness in, and bringing in some of that dark as well as I continue up the necklace, adding in a 3-to-1 ratio with the crystals and the black labradorite. Once you finish stringing the sides of the piece, all that's left is actually to attach the clasps. So I have the pretty clasp garden clasp here, and I'm just going to take my wires and I'm going to end it pretty simply. I'm going to take my crimp bead, place the crimp bead over your 2 strands of wire, go through your clasp, and then take your wire back through that crimp bead. Both strands of wire will fit through the crimp bead if you're using the same 0.018 size. I'm going to pull both of those, making sure that they're sitting nicely. And I am making sure that my clasp is sitting up because, again, this piece does have a front and a back to it. Go in them because you're using 2 strands, you're not going to use your crimping pliers. So again, we're going to learn that flat crimp and how to do that flat crimp with just the needle nose pliers. You want to make sure that you have the same amount of wire showing right at the clasp. Take your pliers and just flatten it straight out along the project. That will work to secure these 2 strands of wire, which then in turn you have 4 pieces of wire going through that crimp bead. Take your cutters then, right up close, and you're just going to cut off the extra wire from the clasp. If you want to, then you can grab your wire guard, and you could have used a wire guard, or what you can use is a crimp cover if you want to cover that to make it look like a nice seamless round bead at the end. Repeat the step on the other side of the necklace, just picking up your crimp tube, sliding it over both strands, making sure then as you do that second tube that you don't have a lot of extra wire exposed on the piece, but you also don't want it too tight that the piece is not flexible and doesn't feel nice to wear. That is actually why a lot of times I tend to use my silk cording rather than wire, which I could have done on this piece as well. Wire goes through and then back through that crimp tube. This is a very easy method to finish any multi-strand necklace if you want to bring it in to one strand, because both of those wires in this beading cable size are going to fit through that crimp tube, and you can do a single crimp. You can see I'm pulling the wires with my pliers one at a time, making sure that they're secured nicely on that piece, on the clasp, and then also that they're nice and close to the actual ending bead. Take your pliers then and flatten that out. From here, you grab your wire cutter and cut that extra wire off nice and close. If you do have a bead afterwards that you can get the actual wire back through, you can go ahead and do that. But at this point then, that banded bead is completed. You have the nice necklace, and I'm actually really excited to wear this piece myself with a nice black sweater or a black shirt. So keep in mind you can do this with a bunch of different styles of beads. Any gemstones that have 2 strands will make it nice and effective and easy to make and up your game of your basic stringing, doing almost a mixed media project, adding in that bead weaving skills with the basic stringing also. I hope you enjoyed learning new things while making this banded necklace. Be sure to check out the subscription box below the video here for all the supplies and colors listed that you can shop with us online at PotomacBeads.com and PotomacBeads.eu. You can get all your amazing jewelry making supplies there, and we're happy to send it to you. Let us know in the comment box what you learned and what you loved from this video, and if you can, give us a little thumbs up. Be sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel if you're not already subscribed, and visit us on Pinterest and Facebook and all those other fun social media outlets. Thanks so much for watching, guys.